everybody. Welcome to Hanover's second annual Energy Forum, 100% renewable energy. Let's make it happen. Thank you a bunch for coming tonight. My name's Stowe. I'm the father of a fourth grader here at the Ray School. I've been on the Sustainable Hanover Committee since 2016 when my neighbor and the departing co-chair, Marjorie Rogalski, came and knocked on my door to welcome me to the neighborhood. And I've been very excited to be part of this whole effort since that point. We're going to go through some kind of a welcome here. Before I get into it, one quick housekeeping. There's a VW Golf. It's dark blue GWG 913 are the plates, and the lights are on. So if that's you, go deal with that. So we were just watching a slideshow, Progress in Pictures. Those are images captured from around town, both residential and then town buildings and some of the institutions in town, including right here at RMS, and the solar and the hot water and the other renewable energy installations that have been put in over the past few years. And so tonight we're really going to give you an update on the progress that's being made, the direction that we're starting to really chart forward, and provide some opportunities for you folks to really engage and take some action yourselves, because it's going to require a full community-wide effort. What we're going to do tonight is primarily hear from 4 different speakers. We've got Julia Griffin, the town manager. We have April Salas, who's the director of sustainability for the town of Hanover. We're going to hear from Rosie Kerr, who's the director of sustainability at Dartmouth. And then Yolanda Baumgartner, who's the chair of the Sustainable Hanover Committee and the Energy Subcommittee, who's really been helping herd all the cats in the room as we're trying to really move this whole thing forward. We're going to hear from each of them and then save Q&A for the end. After each speaker, I'll remind, but we're going to have a couple of folks with index cards and some pens. So if you have some questions and want to jot them down after a speaker, just raise your hand and we'll come around with cards. And then at the end, I'll be helping pull some of those key questions out across to all 4 of the speakers tonight. And then we'll also have a mic if folks want to ask a question live and in person. And then after the Q&A, we're going to go back out into the foyer and have some opportunity to continue some great conversations that were already happening. So we've got some great tables that are out there. We've got Liberty Utilities and New Hampshire Saves, and we've got some residents who are helping share their expertise on energy efficiency. Some residents that are really trying to drive forward on community solar, creating kind of a community co-op type model. And then also residential solar, folks talking about their experiences putting in some installations on their roofs and in their yards. And that's going to be primarily the point of this evening. And again, as we go forward, hoping to give you folks some tools so that you can help figure out how you can engage and be part and take some action along with us as we go forward. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up Julia to kick things off. Just a few bio notes. I think everybody knows who Julia Griffin is, but you may not know all of these things. She received her BA in government from Wesleyan University, and then a master's in international relations from Yale, and then a master's in public and private management also from Yale. And then she began her professional career after that series of educational endeavors with the Office of Management and Budget down in the city of New York. And after that, she went west, and she was the senior management analyst in the city manager's office in Santa Monica, California. And then in 1990, she came back to the Northeast, and she was the assistant city manager for the city of Concord, became the city manager in Concord the next year. And then since 1996, she's been the town manager here in Hanover. Among her many duties, she is a very active participant in the Sustainable Hanover Committee and the Energy Subcommittee, and helping us meet bi-weekly, at least once a month, as we move these things forward. And she's just going to provide an overview tonight of what the town has accomplished and what directions they're heading next.
So, I've got to tell you, Stowe said we as staff, Rob Hausman, wrong direction, sorry. We as staff spend a lot of time staffing Sustainable Hanover and the various subcommittees. And one might think, oh boy, just a lot of work. I have to tell you, in my now 35 years in public sector management, I don't think I've ever worked on a set of issues that are as intriguing, as exciting, or as challenging as these are. So we do this with joy, relatively speaking, and I think all of us continue to learn so much about the opportunities that exist out there for communities and their residents to make a difference that This gives me hope as I wind down my professional management career. It gives me hope that we're effectively contributing to saving our planet going forward. After the town of Hanover decided at town meeting in 2017 to become a Ready for 100 community, we all looked at each other as Sustainable Hanover and said, how the heck are we going to do this? It would have been smart if we'd figured that out before we asked you to vote to become a Ready for 100 community, but we were so busy trying to figure out how to convince you that that made sense that we didn't take the time to actually figure out how we were going to implement the goal. So we were relatively quiet for about 18 months as we deliberated amongst ourselves, looked at examples that other communities could provide to us in terms of what was happening, but also engaged consultants, a company called 3 Degrees out of San Francisco and Portland to help us figure out our plan. And baseline, we decided 2030 is coming before 2050. 2030 is 100% renewable electricity. 2050 is heating fuel and transportation fuel. Sounds like we better get to work on electricity first. And we began, therefore, by determining just how much electricity the town consumed. And by the town, I don't mean just the municipal entity, but I mean every single electricity customer in Hanover. It took us the better part of 6 months working with our consultants to figure that out. You would think it would be relatively straightforward to work with your electric utility to determine how much electricity is consumed within the confines of your border. Not an easy endeavor. And Yolanda Baumgartner will sort of walk you through the numbers here shortly, but know that we now have a pretty good handle on the user group classes in Hanover that consume electricity and used those numbers to develop a strategy. Nope, sorry. First strategy is focused on all of you who are residential customers or small business owners. You make up less than 25%, it's about 18% is my recollection of total electricity consumed in Hanover. But there are a lot of you, small users. And our goal as the town was to see if we could come up with a program that would be easy for you to implement as individual electricity customers, but make a difference. You will hear at some point in the near future about our goal of finalizing what we affectionately refer to as a green power buying cooperative for residential and small business customers. How can we, as individuals who are purchasing electricity for our homes, buy green power rather than just paying Liberty, or in the few cases, New Hampshire Electric Co-op or Eversource customers in Hanover? How can we buy green power and not brown power? The brown power you're buying from Liberty is essentially default power, and it's a mix of green and brown, but primarily brown power generated by natural gas, coal, some hydro, large hydro, but not a lot, and some nuclear. And so we're working now with a series of what are called competitive energy suppliers that are registered to do business in the state of New Hampshire to get pricing on a 100% Greenie certified electricity program that would allow every resident who was interested in Hanover or small business user to go to a website and sign up for green power. The questions you all will be asking us as offerers of a green power program is, how does that price compare to the price of the Liberty default rate? So we're looking to be as price competitive as possible, realizing that many people are price sensitive. But the key is to make it easy for people to sign up for 12 to 24 months. And if we could finalize a program that we can either offer to you independently or convince Liberty to develop a program that would allow you to go to the Liberty website and sign up for a Greenie certified power program, already we would get 18% of our electricity users off brown power and onto green power. Simple, straightforward, and from your perspective as a utility customer, nothing changes. Liberty is still your supplier of electricity. It still transmits the power to you. Liberty is still the entity that will bill you for power, but your actual power consumption will be provided by a competitive energy supplier that specializes in investing in renewably generated electricity. So stand by and stay tuned for that program. I'm going the wrong way, I'm sorry guys. For our large users, and our large users include Dartmouth College, Hypertherm, Kendall at Hanover, Sheridan Printing, Krell, the co-op food stores, and the town and the school district. Our next project, once we get our residential Greenie certified buying co-op launched and get people enrolled, our next project is to go out to bid for a power purchase agreement for anywhere from 12 to 20 years that allows large consumers of electricity, the entities I just identified for you, to lock in to a guaranteed green power rate for a 12 to 20 year period. And I want to give you an example of a project that could come our way. This is not a certainty, but it's a project I love to talk about it because I think it is totally cool. It's the Vineyard Wind Project. If any of you have heard about this project, this will be the first significant offshore wind project constructed in the United States. 14 miles south of Martha's Vineyard, it has already been permitted. My recollection is it's 2,400 megawatts of electricity. If you assume that each turbine is generating somewhere between 7 and 13 megawatts, then you do the math in terms of the number of wind turbines that will be settled out there in the ocean floor. When we met with representatives from one of the two companies that is building that project, they are looking to enter into long-term power purchase agreements, which essentially provides the financing they need to build the project, and quoting prices for offshore wind through the Vineyard Wind Project of between 6.8 and 7.2 cents per kilowatt hour. That's cheaper than Liberty, and that's green power. So as we explore in more detail the possibilities for those large users to lock into a guaranteed electricity rate for 12 to 20 years, cheaper than what we're getting now from Liberty, and know that we're investing in 100% Greenie certified power, that's a very attractive option. And my goal would be to see if we can get all the large users to commit wholly to that effort, because if you think of our 124,000 megawatt hours as a big pie, the large users, 3/4 of that pie. So if we can achieve a large power purchase agreement, it's pretty compelling. Likewise, we've already begun to implement multiple solar options. You certainly saw in the slideshow that was running before this program began that we have over, I think it's 130 entities have already installed solar panels on their rooftops or ground mounted in the town of Hanover. It's almost 1.2 megawatts worth of solar electricity that's been installed. The college has done significant work, and Rosie Kerr is here to talk about what the college has done. I don't know if you've all been following the traffic jam in downtown Hanover the last 2 days, but we now have solar panels on the roof of Town Hall. The team from Revision and Energy Emporium will finish up tomorrow, and then they move to our wastewater treatment plant. Not many people get down to the wastewater treatment plant, but I'll invite you in a couple of weeks to take a drive down there, preferably not on a hot, humid day, but on a windy day. Take a drive down to take a look at the roof of the wastewater plant. The Hanover Wastewater Treatment Plant is the town's largest of our municipal facilities electricity consumer. And so anything we can do to wean that plant off electricity from the brown power electricity from the grid and essentially use the solar power generated from those solar panels is not only a savings to the town, but significantly contributes to reducing our carbon footprint. We are also, as the town of Hanover, talking with solar providers about the potential for installing up to 3 megawatts of ground-mounted solar panels on the property just east of our water filtration plant on Grass Road. The town owns a fair amount of acreage surrounding that plant, and it's perfectly suited to install ground-mounted solar. And so one of the projects you'll be hearing about in the next few months is the prospect of doing that. There'll actually be a warrant, there is a warrant article on the warrant for town meeting on May 14th, which asks town meeting to authorize the select board to negotiate leases and power purchase agreements for the purpose of installing ground-mounted or rooftop-mounted solar, because we want town meeting to agree to give the board that authority to make those decisions about negotiating those PPAs and those leases as a first step in getting a large ground-mounted solar installation going. The college is looking at a substantial additional ground-mounted solar location near our water treatment plant. And then we have a community solar committee made up of several volunteers who are committed to encouraging community residents to come together in some sort of regional, local, neighborhood community solar projects right now. One of the challenges we face is that the statutes in New Hampshire are not particularly supportive of community solar that allows multiple homeowners to invest in the installation of solar panels, ground-mounted or rooftop, in an off-site location, not on their property. And so we're also working with Clean Energy New Hampshire and other organizations to effect some change in the statutes. But just know that we would love to be able to produce 3 or 4 community solar projects of a megawatt that would allow individuals like yourselves who might be interested in investing in solar but your home isn't well suited to establishing solar, would allow you to invest in solar as well. We, tonight, one of the tables that's staffed out there is the NH Saves table and Liberty Utilities. We've provided office space free of charge for a gentleman, Andrew Hatch, who some of you may have met. I assume Andrew's out there somewhere. It's standing in the back of the room. Andrew works with an entity called Resilient Buildings Group, and Andrew's specialty is connecting local businesses with the resources that are available to them through NH Saves and other programs to make their business properties more energy efficient. The state, the utilities each have a tranche of money that's set aside to help commercial businesses take advantage of energy efficiency improvements, but very often that money goes untaken because businesses either aren't aware of it or don't have the internal expertise to avail themselves of that resource. We decided to invite Andrew into our community with Liberty, work out of our public works facility, and he's here to connect with lots of local businesses who just need a better understanding of what's available to them in terms of funding for energy efficiency improvements or reducing their carbon footprint improvements, and Andrew's there to help hold their hand as they figure this out. He's already connected with dozens of businesses in the Hanover-Lebanon area, and this is our way of simply supporting the work in the business community. Finally, the last piece is that we as a community decided that the only way we could try and convince everybody else in town that it was important that you begin to do these things, we recognized that the community, the town, the municipal entity had to walk the talk. And so we've already engaged in a lot of improvements to our buildings to tighten them up and make them more energy efficient. You've seen solar panels on the police station roof, solar panels, as I said, on Town Hall, next wastewater treatment plant. We're getting pricing for solar panels on the salt shed at the Public Works facility, some solar panels on the community center roof. This coming summer, if town meeting authorizes our budget on May 14th, we'll be replacing the roof of the fire station so that we can solarize that roof in the summer of 2020. We now heat and cool Town Hall with air source heat pumps. If you've noticed the 2 big units that are on the side porch of Town Hall, they're now heating and cooling our building, which has dramatically reduced our need to rely on our traditional oil furnace in that building. And we have a number of additional air source heat pump projects in the queue. The next would be the Richard W. Black Community Center. We're committed, and the Select Board is committed to providing us the funding in our budget to help us continue to march forward on these improvements, and we're always eager to hear from residents if they have some other ideas about things they think we should be doing for our buildings or our infrastructure that we aren't. I'm typically happy to say, oh, but we are working on that, let me tell you what we're doing, and people are always surprised to hear all the things we've already done, but just know that we all feel that we can't in good conscience urge everybody else to get their act together if we don't get our act together first. And we're grateful for the funding support we've received through our budget from our citizens to make these things possible. So lots of work going on the town front. And that concludes my section of the presentation.
All right, so thanks, Julia. Again, if folks have some questions you're afraid you might forget as the next few speakers go through, raise your hand. We'll bring some note cards around. Or if speaking into a microphone in front of everybody is not your thing, note cards are another way to get those questions up for the Q&A later. So next we're going to bring April Salas up. She's the Director of Sustainability for the town of Hanover. She is passionate about energy and community involvement, and she moved to Hanover with her family in 2016, same year that I did, to take a position as the Executive Director of the Revers Center for Energy at the Tuck School of Business, helping Dartmouth broadly, and Tuck more specifically, in its focus on energy. And over the past 3 years, she's found a bunch of opportunities to get engaged as a resident. She's volunteered her time on a number of committees, including Sustainable Hanover Committee, the Energy Subcommittee, the Planning Board, and now is joining in the official capacity as the part-time Sustainability Director. Before she moved up here to Hanover, she has a bunch of experience in energy infrastructure and systems analysis, project finance, development, and policy with nearly 2 decades working in the private sector as well as various senior roles at the U.S. Department of Energy. April's last role at the DOE was in the Energy Policy and Systems Analysis Group, leading the White House Quadrennial Energy Review Task Force's review of the U.S. electricity system, and right before that she was managing the State Energy Assurance Program. So she clearly brings a depth of expertise to both Tuck and the town of Hanover, and tonight she's going to be putting a lot of our local renewable energy efforts into this broader context, both regionally and nationally. So thanks, April.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. It's really refreshing to hear all of it summarized by the town manager, Julia, and Yolanda, and the co-chairs of the Sustainable Hanover Committee and the Energy Subcommittee have just been such a joy to work with. And I think that's where I try to find an extra 24 hours in the day to accomplish all of this and be a mother and a wife to 3 children. So thank you all for having me. As Stowe mentioned, I want to contextualize a lot of the work that we're doing. Sometimes it's hard to feel like we're making progress in this huge, initiative to achieve 100%. And it's hard to kind of feel like what we're doing contributes to the overall. And I think it's important to step back and give a sense of what's happening within New England. Because when I started 3 years ago, I think there was a very different picture. And I've been really excited by the level of change and excitement for renewables across New England. And in particular, I want to help characterize it for all of us here, why what we're doing at this local jurisdictional implementation level is really, we talk a lot about implementation is local, but how it really fits into the overall changing energy mix in New England and what we're doing and how it's helping the overall nation accelerate clean energy deployment. So starting with this, I know it's always hard. I take chances on graphs and things like that, and they never show up quite well. But this is actually the interconnection queue for our regional grid operator, ISO New England. So it's the independent system operator for New England. And I think the most important thing, if you leave with nothing else, is the purple and the yellow components. That's the solar and wind proposals for new generating capacity in New England. It is 78% of what's being proposed for New England. This is, an incredible change, I think, in the energy mix in New England. And Hanover is a part of this larger New England regional grid. It's increasingly transitioning towards a more decentralized and a more renewable, clean energy mix. And I think that's really exciting. So the work that we're doing actually feeds into not only offsetting the usage that we pull from the regional grid. If we can keep it as local as possible, it helps not add extra stress. As we're adding all of these solar arrays and other distributed resources that help mitigate some of the peaks in electricity demand, that also helps reduce some of the stress on the system. And so I wanted to start with this because I wanted you all to see how important it is, the work that we're doing. In addition, there's a component here on battery storage, and that is an ever-evolving technology that's increasingly being used at the larger grid scale. And then, of course, the use of hydro and biomass. Natural gas is still a part of the regional mix. And since 2013, one of the biggest issues we face is we have a lot of heating demand. And as Julia mentioned, that's a 2050 further out goal. But nevertheless, it's something for us to keep our eye on. I have a poster outside of my own home and what we're doing to even electrify our heating load to show it can be done. without starting over with a new house, a new build. We're retrofitting a 1966 house and electrifying heating and what the benefits of that are, and it can be done. But this is to show what's been taken off of the New England grid in the last 5 or so years. There's plenty of coal, oil, and nuclear resources that have already been taken off. In particular, there's another 5,000 megawatts that is also in threat of coming off. That's the generation that's in the yellow. And these resources have played an important part in our winter heating demand, as well as electricity generation. There's a lot of talk about expanding natural gas into New England, but currently the system isn't as set up as we would think to serve both the heating demand as well as the electricity demand. And the infrastructure is actually insufficient to help meet the needs of the region, in particular where we are not connected to any pipe system. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But it also means that the importance of increasing renewable energy and local renewable energy is even more important for us as we're thinking about what that capacity looks like for both heating and cooling, and electricity. So as Julia mentioned, we have had our heads up, but also had our heads a little bit down, trying to figure out, how in the world do we come up with this plan for achieving 100% renewables. It's a very ambitious target. We have been, I think, in search of a lot of partnership opportunities to look at what we'd call sister cities across the country, to say who else has done this already, who's kind of solved this challenge. When we've gone out across the nation, either to California or Colorado, some of the leading states in deploying renewable energy, or looking at some of the leading municipalities that are driving such change, I think it was really important for us. It really highlighted that what we're doing in small little Hanover isn't actually that different than what's happening in some of the larger cities. And we can actually use our size to our advantage. Many of the other 100% renewable or just deep decarbonization cities are actually looking at very aggressive goals, but looking at municipal or city load and city facilities. And having a community-wide goal always turns eyes. And so they're looking at Hanover going, how do you figure this out? One of the things that we did, in addition to needing to baseline our electric load for the community, was coming up with some sense of community values. If we're gonna think about our 2030 goal, and some of the decisions that we make today will potentially lock us in for years to come, how are we being thoughtful around how we stage those projects, how we think about pricing, how we think about technology innovation? And so we came up with, through the work with 3 Degrees in our committee, an opportunity to approach how we think about sourcing, how we think about developing local and regional projects, and the social and environmental benefits and factors that really matter to us. So essentially we were creating our values for this type of project development. It's hard to read here, but as we're looking at sustainable sourcing of new and green energy projects, one of the biggest things that Julia already mentioned was the importance of Greenie certified projects. The other thing is cost-effective renewable energy projects. As we shifted to developing our local and regional kind of picture, we realized that there were many other communities that didn't have this figured out. So as we were trying to prioritize how we make decisions on where we kind of add new renewable energy systems, one of the biggest areas that we thought we could make an impact was preferencing local over national. So in any case, as long as it's cost effective, it's reliable, it's efficient, it's accessible, we wanted to preference projects that we can see within the town of Hanover's boundaries. So it's been really important for us, as Julia mentioned, for the town to walk the walk, to be a leader in the community, to highlight and showcase the businesses, the restaurants, the institutions, all of our partners across the community that are actually doing really good things, because they're leaders in this space and they're actually helping to generate more renewables within Hanover's town boundaries. As then we kind of go out from that, how can we add some capacity within the Upper Valley or within the sort of central, New England region? So how can we partner with other smaller communities, larger communities, to actually effectuate projects in partnership with, the city of Lebanon or with others? Can we use these sorts of cooperatives or aggregation of demand to help get projects otherwise that wouldn't necessarily attract cost-effective renewable developers? Then we thought, you know what, it's really important for us to stay within that ISO New England regional grid, so how can we displace some of those brown or dirtier fuel sources by trying to get a project built? As Julia mentioned, even offshore wind in New England, if that's something that we can take advantage of, that's still within our power pool, our bathtub of electricity, of electrons. And then as a last resort, if we can't find anything local or regionally, let's think about going nationally. And if so, how do we think about the social and environmental benefits? Additionality is a concept you've probably heard, or if not, you will hear over time. You know, how do you think about generating new project development as opposed to just buying into existing projects? As you're also thinking about the concept of subtractionality, how do you offset a power region, if you're national, that maybe has a browner power mix? So if building our wind turbine or our solar array in that browner power pool, that displaces that need in preference for renewable energy. And then how can we use Hanover as an example to create replicable projects that others can take advantage of either our first mover advantage or us paving the pathway. So we wanted to do something that we could document and share with others to actually enhance what's happening across New Hampshire. In addition to that, it was really important for us to think about our community values, and it's actually listed out front. And if you have a chance to read through the exhaustive list, I think I'd really encourage you to. The committee spent a lot of time going back and forth on very specific words, and these are just a few that I wanted to highlight. You know, resilient and healthy community powered by affordable and clean renewable energy. Again, it's a really aggressive target, and we want to be cost conscious. We want to think about resilience. We want to think about equality, and something that's also clean and renewable. We aim for efficient, pollution-free electricity. We also have to think about this in the stock of buildings that we have, and in the 2050 goal around transportation, and so that's a little bit further out. These aren't dissimilar to what other communities are doing. How we achieve our targets is actually as important as the vision itself. This is something we spent a considerable amount of time, so it's not just good enough to go and purchase a bunch of renewable energy certificates and check the box. It would be easier for us to just satisfy municipal load with 100% renewables. We've thought of about 4 or 5 ways to do that, more or less today. That's not what we're aiming for. It's an inclusive, community-based process, and that's as important to us, the committee, as is achieving the vision. I skipped the business opportunities, but that's actually really, really important. How do we generate opportunities for companies to come along in the transition or lead in the transition? And then actually involving the entire community, the residents, institutions, small and large businesses. We want to make sure it's something that's equitable and achievable by everyone. And then that last piece I've already touched on, but how do we inspire and assist other communities? The team, I think, spends a considerable amount of time receiving phone calls from other city managers, sustainability, people, planners, volunteer committees, thinking about how to even get to the vote or how to achieve some measure of convergence around establishing a committee to even focus on these issues. So we really aren't alone. In the past year, there's been incredible progress. These are institutions that have been longstanding across New Hampshire and have been extremely supportive. Clean Energy New Hampshire has recently, at the beginning of this year, added municipalities to their membership base. They were formerly just for businesses and actual individuals. And so I arrived at one of the first meetings, to my surprise, and we weren't the first, but the second municipality to join as of January 2nd, I think. So I'll take it. Vital Communities has been a long supporter. Sierra Club got us to this vote, and we're extremely proud of that. We've recently joined the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. This is a national network, which I'll talk about in the next slide, but it's connected us to sustainability managers and government officials in nearly, I can't say every state, but many states and cities across the country and Canada. This has been really helpful in the implementation framing for what we're doing and how we've gotten to where we are, because it helps us have someone to pick up the phone and to speak with and to learn, what was the RFP process like? What were some of the planning processes that you ran into? How did you approach GHG inventories, things like that. There's been an increasing uptick in cities actually coming together to discuss their progress in their goals. One such is being based out of Concord, and that's a New Hampshire Municipal Roundtable. There's also the New England Municipal Sustainability Network. And then we've had an increasing number of calls led by the R100 crew for developing and building collaboration across New Hampshire and the R100 communities. And this has been extremely helpful. We have a monthly phone call where we talk about updates, progress, etc. And then obviously, as I mentioned, businesses, institutions, residents, you guys are already doing so many good things, and we're here to figure out how we can incorporate and support further growth. So one of the exciting factoids that I like to mention, the map on the left is actually of the USDN member cities, and I'll talk about that in a second. Well, I should talk about it now. It's over 200 member cities across North America, representing 80 million residents. And so this is a really expansive network. It's very focused on implementation, which has been very critical in supporting the work that we're doing. The other exciting thing is, even as of January of this year, Keene just adopted an R100 vote, and now we're up to 5 in New Hampshire. We were the first 2 years ago, and now there's 5 communities. But there's another 10, 15 that have really aggressive deep decarbonization and renewable energy targets, and they shouldn't be left behind. So having that monthly call and annual forum to meet with those cities as well has been really critical. So as we transition over, and I'll turn it over to Rosie Kerr to talk about what Dartmouth's doing. But some of the lessons, I think, that are guiding us from this past year, Yolanda is really great as a co-chair, keeping us on target. There's a million different ways we can start, and about 500 ideas that we can think about achieving, and about 20 other subcommittees we'd like to form. And she's been really critical in helping us identify some very specific targets that we can achieve each year. And that's been very helpful, in addition to having staff that are dedicated to the support of these volunteer committees. But what we've realized, and as Julia has already mentioned through this multi-pronged approach, is that no one size fits all. And what works for a small business isn't going to work for a resident, which isn't going to work for a large institution. And so we are thinking about how we approach each one of these user groups independently and with respect to their needs. Tapping into the technical resources of the organizations I just mentioned has been incredible. And the importance of establishing and growing partnerships like that with Liberty Utilities, trying to find access to grant funding and other things that maybe businesses or residents aren't even aware of, or us as committee members, how we can share our experiences and answer questions to help lower the barriers of fear for approaching some of these, at least I can speak to the residential level, some of these programs. And then obviously continuing to support the ongoing work across the community. So we're going to hear from our largest institutional user, Rosie Kerr, and get an update on Dartmouth. Thank you.
All right. So thanks, April. And again, if folks have questions, you want to jot them down, raise your hand. We can get those note cards out to you. Before we get Rosie up here, just a couple of words of introduction for her. She's a Dartmouth 97 grad with a background in environmental science and a master's degree from Yale. When she was in graduate school at Yale, she kind of unexpectedly entered into the energy sector, and she and some classmates were working on a business plan that was looking to turn waste from salmon processing plants in Alaska into biofuel. And that has led Rosie to a series of energy startups in the commercial energy sector, for new electricity suppliers, and then into the demand side energy management market. As the sustainability director at a sustainability and energy consulting firm called Greener U, Rosie became convinced that universities can become innovation engines to make the world better, more efficient, and more sustainable. She came to Dartmouth because she believes the college is uniquely positioned to help solve some of the most interesting challenges that society faces today, especially those related to energy and sustainability. She's led expeditions in the Arctic, horsepacking trips in the American West, and has served on the board of Climate Ride, Vineyard Power, and the Upper Valley Rowing Foundation. She lives on a farm in Vermont with her partner and 3 kids, and she's here tonight to tell us some of the cool and exciting stuff that Dartmouth's been doing and is up to right now. Thanks, Rosie.
Oh, I'm going the wrong direction too.
down.
Oh, it is down. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Opposite day.
That's me.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. So I just wanted to give you a little context for how we work on sustainability at Dartmouth. Obviously, our core mission at Dartmouth is not actually the production or consumption of energy, it's the education of students. So our office works kind of at the intersection of Dartmouth's core mission and our operations. We have 1 foot on the operational iceberg and 1 foot on helping our students get their hands on real-world experiences that enrich their education and give them an opportunity to tackle the big problems facing the planet while they're here at Dartmouth. Dartmouth, over the last 40, 50 years, has worked on sustainability from a variety of angles. You might be aware that we had one of the first recycling programs in the country, an early environmental studies program that focused on systems thinking, and had lots of passionate individuals around the campus who were working on sustainability efforts on their own because it was something they cared about. In 2016 to 2017, President Phil Hanlon asked us to do a sustainability planning effort to try to understand how Dartmouth might lead on sustainability. And on Earth Day in 2017, just shortly before the Ready for 100 campaign was announced, Dartmouth committed to some very audacious sustainability goals in 6 operational categories, of which energy is one. Since then, we've been working on a plan to meet those goals. So Dartmouth's current, some of these slides did not come through. Dartmouth's current energy mix is, if we're looking at all of our energy consumption, so every MMBTU we use, not just our electricity, but also our thermal load, we currently consume number 6 fuel oil, grid electricity, and we're generating, as of now, a big change from 2016, 2% of our energy from solar on rooftops. The energy goals we've set are very ambitious and are in line with the latest science. So a 50% greenhouse gas emissions goal by 2025, and an 80% greenhouse gas emissions reduction goal by 2050. Because our biggest energy consumer on campus and the biggest source of greenhouse gases at Dartmouth is our heating, we've kind of flipped from what the town is doing, and we're focusing first on our energy consumption in the heating plant. So you might be aware of Dartmouth's heating plant. It was built in 1896. It's now right in the middle of town. At the time, it was kind of on the edge of town. And in 1896, it was a very innovative cogeneration plant. It burned first coal and then oil, switched over to oil in the 1920s. And essentially, we're doing the same thing now that we did then on a slightly bigger scale. So number 6 fuel oil arrives at our plant, about 3.8 million gallons of it a year. We burn that number 6 fuel oil to produce steam and about a third to a quarter of the electricity that our campus consumes via cogeneration. That process is about 55 to 65% efficient, despite lots of efficiency improvements within the plant. So only 55 to 65% of the energy that's in that number 6 fuel oil that's arriving is actually producing useful work on the campus. So because this produces the vast majority of our greenhouse gas emissions, the first thing that we set about doing was improving our efficiency. So we have a very proactive Department of Engineering on Dartmouth's campus that has been working really hard on efficiency over the last 12 years, most notably replacing steam valves, HVAC systems, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems in buildings. Every time we replace a building, we replace it with a much more efficient new building. So this is the class of 1978 Life Sciences building, which replaced the Gilman Life Sciences building before that. Gilman was very inefficient. The new building is very efficient. That work over the last 10 years has produced massive gains in efficiency. So as our square footage has increased by 19%, our total energy consumption at Dartmouth has decreased by 24%. And that's due to the work of many people in this room. I see Abby Bjorklund and Steve Shadford and many others who worked really hard to produce energy efficiency savings at Dartmouth. That said, we still have a long way to go. I seem to have several blank slides, but I'll tell you what's supposed to be on this. Imagine a picture with your mind. So the next thing we have to think about is improving our efficiency even more. One of the ways we can do that, and one of the goals that President Hanlon set in 2017, was to improve, 2017 was to improve the efficiency of our distribution system. And the way that we can do that is to transition from using steam to distribute heat around our campus to using hot water to distribute heat around our campus. This slide was meant to show a leaking steam line on Dartmouth's campus. To do this, we'll have to transition all of our buildings from steam distribution to hot water, and that means major renovations all around our campus. This endeavor will be expensive and time-consuming, but it will produce a 20% efficiency savings in our system. So instead of having to have a plant, if we replace our plant to replace it at its current scale, we can replace it at a size that is smaller due to the efficiency gain. The next thing we have to look at is how could we provide heat for Dartmouth in a way that is more sustainable than what we're doing now. We looked at providing heat via not using combustion, as April did in her house. Unfortunately, right now, that's not a feasible method for Dartmouth because of our scale and because of the resiliency of some of those systems in our climate at our scale. They're also very, very expensive at our scale. So when we look around at what some of the options are to provide thermal energy for the college over the next 30 years to replace fossil fuel, one of the things that we see as an available resource is biomass. There are several benefits to using biomass. One is we can change our supply chain from a global supply chain to a local supply chain. With very careful sourcing, biomass can be sourced sustainably, and Dartmouth's total energy consumption of biomass is a tiny fraction of the forestry industry of the Upper Valley. So we feel like there's an option to produce our heat using biomass, to improve our efficiency from 55% of the energy in our source fuel to 89% of the energy in our source fuel, and to do that with a local resilient supply chain. As I said, we looked at several scenarios for how we could transition Dartmouth to a new heating system that's more efficient. One was to continue business as usual. One of the problems with continuing business as usual at Dartmouth is because of the age of our steam heating system, even just maintaining that system and running it into the future is very expensive. So there's no option to do nothing to change our heating system. Many of our steam lines are old and need to be replaced, and steam lines are very expensive to replace. So we've looked at just changing the distribution system to hot water. We've looked at a non-combustion option, which I said was very expensive. And then the most likely option is to convert to biomass and a hot water distribution system to improve the efficiency and also to change the source fuel. In addition, we're looking at what can we do beyond our heating system? How can we transition our whole energy system to a renewable system? We think there's a lot of pieces of the pie that we can put together to do that. This is a potential future scenario for Dartmouth in 2025. If we transition to biomass, most of our MMBTUs would then be coming from sustainably sourced biomass. Some portion from grid electricity and some portion from solar. We hope to build, as Julia referenced, a large ground-mounted solar array somewhere close to our campus. And then one of the things we're considering is this option of large-scale power purchase from the New England grid for something like wind. And here wind can be a stand-in for a variety of different sources that could be purchased from the grid at large scale. We, like the town of Hanover and working very closely with the town, love the idea of a local wind project like the Vineyard Sound project, but we're still looking at what could that wedge look like. I think the takeaway is it's going to take many more than one wedge. We're going to have to think about a variety of sources for a large consumer like Dartmouth. We're the biggest consumer in the town of Hanover by far, and so we have a responsibility to help the town reach its goals, but it's going to take a variety of wedges to get there, not just one. And what we're thinking about is what should those wedges look like as we approach our 2025 goal and our 2050 goal to help advance the town. We're also working really hard on improving the transparency of what we're doing. So across the 6 operational areas, making data more readily available and providing kind of window into our thinking and how we're hoping to advance sustainability across those areas. In many of the areas, operational areas that we're trying to improve sustainability, like food, or even to some extent energy, some of those data are difficult to wrap your arms around or to tell a story with. For example, in food, that's our biggest contract, but assessing the sustainability of food is very difficult. There's lots of different ways you could measure sustainability. Food miles, you could measure it in whether it's organic or not. So trying to come up with really good data and transparency into each of the 6 operational areas is our first challenge. To that end, we have created a platform on our website where we're creating websites for each of the 6 operational areas, and where you can go and see dashboards and reports on, right now, energy, water, and waste. This is something that we've worked hard on with groups of students over the last year. One of the things that President Hanlon included in his goal setting was the announcement of a sustainability core of students who are working on gathering, analyzing, and expressing data, not only to improve Dartmouth's transparency, but also as an opportunity for them to learn about how you would do that. They're working on things like our ASHE STARS report, which is the national reporting structure that Dartmouth uses to report to on our sustainability progress for the association. It's to the Association of the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. And this group of students has been working on gathering data for that reporting, and therefore creating greater transparency into Dartmouth's data. So that's something you should see over the next several years as that data comes online. But we encourage you to go to our website and check it out, and you'll get a view into the work we're doing. There's also contact information there if you want to send us a note. I think with that, I'm turning it over to Yolanda.
All right, thanks, Rosie. And then last up, we have Yolanda Baumgartner. She co-chairs the Sustainable Hanover Committee and the Energy Subcommittee. And she's been a leader in the town of Hanover's efforts to move towards clean energy goals since 2013. So she was really instrumental in the campaign leading to Hanover being recognized as an EPA green power community in 2014, and then helping lead the charge on the Ready for 100 vote when we voted on that in 2017. She's retired from Dartmouth College. She was the Associate Director for Administration at the Student Health Service. And before she did that, way back, she was at UC Berkeley out in California, where I came from, and then got her MBA from Plymouth State University. She's going to kind of tie the bow on this evening, kind of talking about how the Sustainable Hanover Committee has been charting the path forward and where we're hoping to pull all of you folks into the mix as we move forward this next year. Thanks, Yolanda.
Hi, I didn't realize I was supposed to bring ribbon. I feel very privileged to present the work of the Sustainable Energy Subcommittee. And I thank you for coming tonight to hear about our work. It is important for us to keep you informed about our progress, and equally important that we find out what you think about all of this. Our subcommittee is now 18 members strong, and I wanted to introduce them this way. And also I wanted to give a shout out to the Neighborhood Action Group, which is a relatively new ally of ours. I think their middle name says it all, and we're really glad to be working with them. We have something that we call our public document. I wish we had a jazzier name, but it describes our mission, our guiding principles, strategies. There's a FAQ on the Ready for 100 commitment. We posted it on poster boards outside, and it's also on Sustainable Hanover's website. The cover for it last year was decorated with puzzle pieces, and from listening to Julia's review of our first year, I mean, we were quite puzzled by the whole thing. So this year we're more optimistic. We put tools up there. So that's more action-oriented because actually we're learning from some of you and the things that you've done that there are tools out there. So we've collected some Ask Me volunteers here. And from the exhibits, we hope that you'll talk to them, look at the exhibits, and you'll get perhaps some ideas, some tools that you can take from this event. I hope you enjoyed the slideshow that David put together. here are some numbers to go along with that. So this first chart shows the number of new installations that came online in Hanover over 4 time periods. You can see the effect of Solarize. And the last column is from 2018 to 2019. So we're still 9 months short of the full period. But I think it's going to be a really strong year because the installing season has just started for this year. And we may get a bump because this is the last year for that 30% federal tax credit. So I think by this time next year, we would have something very good to report. The average size of a residential system has been going up. Panels are more efficient. They're producing more power per panel. Prices have come down. And people are starting to size thinking about electric vehicles and electric heat pumps. So as of this week, with the town putting up the panels on Town Hall, we're now at 141 systems in town. This has a total capacity of 1.6 megawatts. And it's almost evenly divided between residential and non-residential owners. We think this picture will change quickly as Dartmouth and the town bring on more solar. But right now, the residents are the ones with bragging rights. They have 51%. So when we do a campaign that's called Ready for 100 Renewables, we tend to think of bringing in new energy sources. But it is just as important to look at reducing our overall consumption. So what this is, and don't try to read the detail of it, but the Solutions Project from Stanford, led by Mark Jacobson, did a projection for Hanover about our 2050 goal. So I will just look at the bottom part of that chart, and what it shows is that they have forecasted that we need to reduce our or our energy demand by 46%. So I haven't tried to see if this is a good number, and I'm not sure it's necessary, but what is universally accepted is that there has to be a substantial reduction. And so this is what's happening with electricity in town-wide, so this is everybody. And we have been coming down. So every year there's a small reduction, totaling up to 8% starting from 2013. Recently, we've gotten a little more detail from Liberty. And so we now know that actually 1.3 million kilowatt hours were eliminated in this past year. And actually all of that came from the large users. So, and that makes sense, that's consistent, and we know, for example, from Rosie, that Dartmouth has been working hard on this, the town has, Hypertherm, so they are doing a good job. And since it's hard to get credit for energy savings and energy efficiency, so at least here I want to say bravo to them. Residents and small businesses rarely have the energy expertise as the large organizations do. So energy savings for them are often available but left on the table. And I think Julia referred to that in her talk. So I wanted to show one program which Bob Reels and Andrew Hatch are working on. And this is the Simplified Lighting Incentive Program, which began in February. And this is a pilot project set in Hanover and Lebanon. Andrew is working here in Hanover, and he's ready to assist at every stage of a project and partnering on-site coordination with program incentives, such as you see here, is making for a really effective combination. So they have had an amazing start for having less than 2 months being in operation. And this is something we've tried to do multiple times through the years. And this appears to be a great combination. I think by next year we'll have some good results to report to you. There's one other thing we're doing, and here we're thinking about residents. We've put together an LED light kit, and that's to encourage residents to save energy with LED lighting. This kit is going to be housed at Howe Library, so anyone with a library card who can check out a book can check out this kit. This will allow them to see how this lighting works in their own home environment. I think there are a lot of suspicion and avoidance of LED lights because people remember what they were like when they first came out. So the first generation lights had a lot of problems. And they have really improved. There's a lot of choice in the type of light bulbs you can get, choice in color. But in order to select them, you have to learn the new terminology. So this kit includes a little education and actually just that, experimenting in your own environment. So we're hoping that this will encourage more transitions to LED lighting. We're working on other programs, those really great ones that Julia has already covered, a few others. So please stay tuned for announcements. We tend to do it through the town e-news, and that is at, if you've not already signed on, it's hanovernh.org/subscribe. I really like this quote. I have the right quote here. Oh, this describes some of the benefits of LED. Are there people here who are substantially on LED lighting? I mean, like, at least half of your lighting? Great, great. Well, the rest of you can really save a lot of money. You're saving emissions. Go to Howe Library, check this out. So I have this quote from Paul Hawken, who published a book called Drawdown several years ago, and probably many of you know it. His project is known for coming up from a very deep dive to name 100 specific ways to reverse climate change. But when he was asked to summarize, he goes to a very simple truth, and that is the ultimate solution is with community. And here is kind of a graphic demonstration of that, I think. This is a hard chart to read, so I apologize for that, but I pulled it out of an email. This is, the little green line represents the number of people who live in cities and states that have committed to 100% green energy. And what you see is that it began very slowly. There's a little bump around 2017, which is when Hanover contributed 10,000 people. And then you see it just has exploded. In fact, the y-axis here tops out at 60 million. And the email that came from Jody Van Horn, who's the national director for Ready for 100. She sent that chart, but at the same time she said, oh, but we're at 70 million. And this translates to 1 in 5 Americans who are now living in cities and states that have committed to 100% clean energy goal. I mean, that is really exciting, and I think possibly we're getting towards a new normal. So, thank you.
All right, so we're going to open it up to questions. If you did write a question on a note card, you can raise your hand. David or somebody will come around and collect those and bring those up here. I just raised those up. We also have an audience microphone here that Rob's got. So if you have a question you want to bring up for our panel here, then you can raise your hand. We can get a microphone to you as well. So let me know if you have any. Perfect. All right, so we'll get started with a couple of these. So yes, slide presentations, can we get a copy? Okay, excellent. So we are recording this presentation this evening as a Zoom meeting. We're going to be posting that recording later so that folks can access what we've been through this evening. The second question here is, what is the typical ROI in the first 5 years of operation for a solar array? Number one, and then B for wind turbines. So I'm not sure who's best to potentially jump on that. And then I'll bring the mic to you.
No?
April, maybe?
Yeah,
You're gonna want to use this mic.
okay.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I
Jeff.
think to get at the question is sadly, it depends. It depends on what scale, and it depends on how much of the electric usage it offsets through the solar. And so you can significantly advance the return on investment if you're able to cover more of your solar. For example, in our home, we have a 10 kilowatt system, and by also electrifying our thermal energy, we're able to reduce our ROI and our payback period actually from above 15 years to just under 10. So we generate significant savings by doing those two things combined, but that's at a residential scale, and it really does depend when you're getting into larger utility scale projects.
I mean, I think at the Dartmouth scale, we don't really think in 5-year increments. When we're thinking about a solar array or a commitment to purchase wind, we would be thinking over a longer time horizon, and the ROI is usually 10 or 12 or 13 years. But for an institution like Dartmouth that owns its own infrastructure and intends to be around for a while, that's a reasonable scenario.
Just to talk about my own specific residential example, because I know this really well. My husband and I, as part of Solarize, ended up spending about $34,000 to put 24 solar panels on our roof, convert our old, very energy inefficient oil furnace to a new Baderis, highly energy efficient furnace as backup to air source heat pumps, which we also installed. So the total cost for all that work was $34,000. At the time, our projection was the payback was going to be about 11 and a half years. It's actually been reduced to just about 9 years, because what we've discovered is we're using far less fuel oil with our new furnace than we had originally projected. And so we're halfway now through our payback period on all those systems. So it gives you just one small household example of ROI.
Excellent. So here's a question for Rosie, and it's, has Dartmouth's changed calendar impacted energy usage? So no students Thanksgiving to the new year. How does that shift?
Abby, you can probably answer this question better than I can, but it hasn't changed it very much. We actually continue using our buildings during the period when students are not here, and residence halls, which we aren't using, for example, in the Thanksgiving to Christmas period, are not our biggest consumers of thermal energy. So it hasn't changed it very much.
Thanks, Rosie. This is a question for Julia. Is there any possibility of creating a municipal utility instead of buying power from a CES or a power purchase agreement for the big users? And some of the things we've thought about on that front.
Oh, that gives me a headache just thinking about it, because it's a huge undertaking. It is absolutely true that if we had our own municipal electric utility, we could be much more nimble than we are now as a customer of a large electric utility. But municipalizing an electric assets is a really challenging and often litigious process. I'm using Boulder, Colorado, which we sort of consider as one of our sister cities when it comes to taking a look at communities that are a little further down the track than we are on their 100% renewable energy goal. Boulder's been ensnared in a very expensive lawsuit with their electricity supplier because Boulder voted to municipalize their electric assets, and it's not going well. So we could. We're doing a couple of things in lieu of that. We're working right now in a support role for the city of Lebanon, and particularly Councillor Cliff Below, who's extremely knowledgeable in the area of municipal aggregation of electricity, which essentially allows a community to become a single buyer of electricity
for every electricity consumer in the community, as long as that customer wants to be a part of that essentially aggregated buying co-op. And just yesterday, April and I were down at a legislative hearing before the House Municipal and County Government Committee, testifying in favor of that bill, which has already come out of the Senate as a thumbs up. So, and the other, as I said, is creating these green power buying cooperative options where we work either with a competitive energy supplier to sell us green power, or to try and work with Liberty to ask them to create a 100% renewably generated green power option for all Liberty customers. And Liberty serves 22 communities in New Hampshire. So that's, I think, a more likely scenario than us going down the road toward municipalization.
Cool. I found another microphone.
Thank you.
This is a question, I think, April, from your side, this is a good one for you. And the question is, how should we respond to towners who say, Hanover can only do this because it's rich, the rest of us don't have any choice? How does that factor into our value system here?
Well, I think that's a hard one to swallow. And we have heard this. We've also heard if Hanover can do it, then we can do it. And I think because we do have certain resources that other smaller communities don't have, primarily though, I want to call attention, and I said in my remarks, is we have a really involved town staff and a very, very involved volunteer committee. And as we were looking across the state, bigger cities, smaller towns, one-person volunteer committees trying to drive change, what we've seen is that it's been critical to have really invested community members in not only the outcome of getting to the vote, but the implementation side. And so to the extent that we can use the knowledge of our residents and our committee members and the town staff and their vast experience to be able to drive change, the best thing we can do is to document all of what we're doing to make it that much easier. New Hampshire is a complicated, very local jurisdiction specific place to site and build renewable energy projects. And so what we've found is even if we're looking at neighboring communities, larger and smaller, richer or poorer, so to speak, it's been really hard to translate one project from one part of the state to a project in another part of the state. And that's why we have two separate committees even focused on community solar, one sited on municipal land, one sited on private land, and trying to collect as many of those lessons learned and best practices so that we can come up with something that sifts through all of that. So I think, I see what we have here is a richness in intellectual knowledge and capacity and a lot of really interested people wanting to drive change. We were the first in the state to vote, and we want to use that to our advantage in helping to, to the extent we can, partner with other communities and to help drive that change. But I directly answer the question. It's expensive for everyone, and I think that's something that isn't lost on Hanover residents. Renewables can be cost prohibitive, and it is equally important in the values that we've placed, that we have equal opportunity for low-income, fixed-income residents. We talk a lot about equity in the work that we're doing, and thinking of creative ways and learning from other communities that have made strides in implementing very equitably sort of just renewable energy transition types of projects so that we can borrow from those advances and apply them here in Hanover and vice versa.
Great. So acknowledging time, we're a little behind schedule here. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to...
Sorry, can I ask it?
Yes.
Sorry to jump in. Hi, April, I just wanted to ask a question related to what you just said that I've been holding on to in my mind. So I'm a renter in Hanover, and I live in a very poorly insulated house that is probably over 80 years old with 4 other people, and our electric bill is probably like $80 a month, but during the winter our heating bill is like $450 a month. So if I had money to invest in some kind of efficiency improvement, I would put it toward heating, not towards electricity, because it's just so so black and white cost-wise. I'm wondering, specifically what you're thinking about in terms of how to engage people for whom that's the calculus, given that the first goal that you're hitting is the 2030 electricity goal, and you're not thinking about heating for a little while.
Yeah, we're focused on 2030 for electricity, but in every one of our committee meetings, we've talked about efficiency being key. And as Yolanda emphasized, using less is critical to achieving our goals. I actually, as a homeowner, was in the exact same boat that you're describing as a renter. I had the ability to engage the New Hampshire Saves grant process to access the resources that I was surprised that many residents, homeowners, renters even, aren't actually either aware of or taking advantage of. And there's not a large swath of money, but there's so much money and resources on the table that New Hampshire residents aren't even taking advantage of. To be able to do some of the low-hanging fruit, like LED lighting conversion. You don't want to size a system, solar or fuel oil or any other source, if you're just kind of blowing it out, the window or, out the door. Heating is a real challenge here, and it's hard to think about putting in solar before you've thought about better insulating your home. We have one of the oldest building fleets in the country. It's a real challenge, and we push conversations around weatherization and efficiency, I'd say first, second, third, and then talking about how we can transition either the thermal or the electric side to something that's less carbon intensive.
Also, just thinking practically, so we will be a weatherized community with vital communities next winter, and a target audience for our weatherization program will be our landlords. Lots of you guys are renting from landlords who have old housing stock. They haven't been incentivized in any way to invest in making those buildings more energy efficient, much less maintaining them. And so, truly, I could envision us targeting that segment of our residential housing ownership population because those buildings need a lot of help.
This is a similar thing that we approach to with the small business community. It's one thing to look at the folks who are taking up and occupying retail or other commercial space on Main Street. It's a different conversation to think about who owns the building and what opportunities they can access. So, sorry.
Actually, next week we have a meeting with Sarah Brock at Vital Communities to start talking about how to mount a weatherized campaign, and that will focus on sealing and insulating. So I think that would solve some of the heating problem.
Cool, good question. Thank you. So I'm going to get to the last question, but I want to be respectful of all the questions that have come in, so I'm going to try to field a couple of them quickly. There's individual who asked about if there's a field in the neighborhood that might be owned by Dartmouth or Hanover, panels being installed to provide energy for the neighborhood. So I'm going to direct you to the community solar table out in the foyer. And towards the warrant article that's going to be at the town meeting that's helping facilitate some of those types of decisions being possible in the future. If you have a compost question, come find me if I have an answer for you. And then in terms of Hanover looking at district level heating, stay tuned. So we're focused on electricity right now for our 2030 goals, at least as the town of Hanover, the Sustainable Hanover Committee. And then our 2050 goal incorporates the heating fuel sources and our transportation fuel. So stay tuned on that district heating idea. Certainly we're looking to learn a lot from what Dartmouth's doing. So the last question I think is a challenging one, and it relates to kind of the town and Dartmouth's interrelationship and some of the divergence in timing of goals. And if Dartmouth's goal is looking to get to about 80% renewable by 2050, and the town's goal is 100% renewable by 2050, how are we kind of conversing with one another and looking at aligning those goals and getting to the same place? So I think Rosie and Julia can jump in on that.
So we are working really closely with the town, and I think that Dartmouth is completely aware that we are of and part of the town and an important driver in the town. The reason that we set an 80% goal and not a 100% goal was because we could not envision a feasible way to get to 100% without carbon offsets, which we didn't want to commit to at this stage. That said, it's quite possible that between now and 2050, we will work our way closer to 100% in support of the town's goals. We're really sensitive to the fact that Dartmouth has to participate in order to drive the town's goals. If we're only at 80%, it might prohibit the town, for example, from getting to 100%. I think that's a place where town residents can be active participants. You all have voices, and to the extent that it matters to you that Dartmouth participate, I think that's a thing that you should speak up about. that helps drive our goals and helps push us to be more aggressive.
I remain optimistic that we'll meet our goals with Dartmouth. And one of the reasons I'm so optimistic is when I look at the graph that Yolanda had up there that showed the progress that the nation is making just within the last 2 years. It is phenomenal what is happening, both around the world, but certainly in the United States. And when I think about how much progress we've made just in the last 2 years and that Dartmouth has made in the last 4 or 5 years, this sector is transitioning so quickly and innovation is occurring on so many levels that we can't even begin to imagine what possibilities might exist for us 5 and 10 years from now. And so our goal as the town is to continue to push this conversation with Dartmouth and with all of you. Dartmouth is an excellent partner to work with on this front. Their students are pushing the institution, their alumni are pushing the institution, and progress is exciting because the landscape is changing rapidly, and as climate change's impacts become more significant, more and more people are realizing that we can't afford to diddle around here. So I'm not too fixated on 2030 or 2050 as being an absolute goal to do X, Y, and Z. I'm not sure that's practical. This is changing rapidly, and we're just trying to keep up.
Great. Well, thanks to our panel this evening for sharing about that.